I've already started my spreadsheet on the Saints roster. The kind of the right now it's a 90-man version because that's what they're working with during the offseason and anticipating what the 53 may look like. But some comments by Lance Moore the other day on the Saints Squad Show podcast inspired me to think, well, maybe a way too early look might not be as early as we think. I'm Tim. Let's talk Saints. Now, I'm going to play the clip from the Saints Squad Show podcast that Lance Moore is on. When they were just the other day talking the conversation about OTAs ending, minicamp, which will be this upcoming week happening, and in the training camp. And he had a pretty veteran, interesting take. Like I said, I've already started my spreadsheet on working on the roster, but something he said made me think, hey, what does it pertain to the 90 man as it currently is for the Saints?
Camp is not as uh, rep even as one might think, right? Like going into training camp, the organization, coaches, front office, executives, they know about 80 to 85% of the roster already, right?
Yeah.
So if you've already know 80 to maybe even 90% of the roster, they already know who's going to be the majority of the team. So
And that really caught me. When he's saying they already know 80 to 90%, and I'm thinking of the 53 man, 16-man practice squad, 17 if you have an exempt player from the international program, which we do in kicker Charlie Smith, thinking, well, what does that mean for our roster right now? And so I had the names down, kind of knew what was going on, hadn't really organized anything, put any thought into it. And I'm going, well, let's just say 85%, kind of the middle number when he's saying about 80 to 90%. Well, what would that look like? So, I mean, you're talking about 45 players of the 53-man roster that the organization has more or less made up their mind on already. And then, in account of the ones that you're taking away from that, the 16 that's going to wind up on the practice squad, plus a 17th if you have the exemption. And it felt like when he said that, especially the past few years, but even going back into the end of Sean's, and grain of salt, there's a little two separate issues going on here, but even going back to the last few years of Sean's coaching tenure, that 85% to 90% seemed like almost on the low side. Like we almost knew what our roster was going to be rolling in, and there wasn't a lot of jobs open up. Now, the difference between the two is the roster had started declining 2020, 2021. That's kind of my opinion where it zeroed in. So at the very end of Sean, there were some roster spots that should have been, um, let's just say, open for somebody coming in to take a job that probably wasn't. But just prior to that, our roster was so good and so deep, 17, 18, 19, 20, that was probably a realistic assumption. It was going to take somebody to really come in and play, um, to take a spot away from one of the veterans or one of the free agents when we were signing our handful every year to bring in. It was a specific goal of mine and what we were trying to do. We kept that up too long when our roster was not what it was during that stretch when we were winning divisions and making the playoffs every year, which is caught up to us now. So when I threw that number out, I was out at 85% and looking at 45 of the 53. And that's when I said, look, I got the spreadsheet started. I need to go ahead and organize it. And let's kind of test this theory because, not that I don't doubt anything he's saying at all. Not that, but just kind of testing it against the current roster to see, well, what exactly does that look like as far as the players that are here and what we think, and I'm going to say me. And so what I think, in my opinion, of going, how realistic is that let's just say he's got 85% normal organizations under normal circumstances, that 85%, that roughly 45 number. Are we even in that ballpark? Are we over? Are we under? How does it look? So let's break it down and take a look. Going along with Lance Moore, if we use the number 85% of players that the organization is realistically thinking is going to be on the roster as they're starting training camp, you're looking probably about 45 active players, roughly. Now we're not gonna. We'll mention the other ones because you do have the practice squad, the guys that can clear waivers, and you're going to try to bring back 16 of those, 17 if you have an exemption, which we did last year for Charlie Smith. I don't know, and the last I saw, I think we still have it right now, but I don't know how long you get that if it's into the season, through the season, whatever. But just to mention that it's hanging out there. So when I started working on my spreadsheet, just kind of like red line players, just put them up in red. If I'm thinking, yeah, they're gonna all likelihood be on the roster. Um, and then from there, it was kind of like highlighting everybody else. And I didn't really rank anything yet. I'm just kind of trying to get a number and a play for, yeah, are they solid lock, or are they going to fall in the category where it's realistic, or they're in an out and out fight for their job? So I'm going to pop it up on screen real quick so you can see it before we get in and start talking about it. And we'll start with quarterbacks because it's fairly simple. You're basically looking at, you know, Rattler, Chuck, Hayner. I think unless Hayner's injury caused him a setback to really open the door for Deckers to come in and challenge for that third spot, I think more what we're talking about here is Hayner's probably number three, and we're going in the training camp with a Rattler Chuck battling out situation. I think that's almost kind of set in stone, probably really locks up that 85%. Running back, Kamara's the only one I really feel confident right now. The rest of them, you either have young guys who you feel good about, especially like Neal and Yorns. You have some veterans kind of floating around there, especially in Edwards Hilaire, whose past history. Um, just trying to refine that again and seeing if they can make a roster. Injury issues like Kendre Miller. That's just a mix that I just don't know what to really think about. And thinking I can't honestly say, yeah, they're 100% safe, or in that 85% that the organization is trying to rely on. Um, at the start of training camp, thinking, okay, we got that spot locked down. It's not really a concern. And I kind of feel very similar to receiver and tight end, in which in both cases, I think you got your top four, basically the veteran types. Now, we know how much they like Olave and Shaheed. They appear to be healthy and good to go. Cooks and Wilson as the veterans, and you have a slew of younger guys who some of them at times have shown something that you kind of go, like above means. A couple stretches in a couple of games where he looked really, really good. But again, I don't know if that's anything you want to rely on that 85%. Same thing with the tight ends. Taysom Hill, if he can get healthy, he's kind of the wild card in the tight end group. If he can get healthy and realistically be on the field at some point during the season, I'm guessing best case scenario, he's probably going to start on the pup. And hopefully we get him back at some point, which means you have a slew of young tight ends. Holker, you know, Matavio, Jacobson, Welch, these guys that are sitting there, somebody's gonna have to step up because you know, Stoll, Moreau, and Johnson are there. That's three of that 85%, that 45 or so number we're looking at. You're planning, as far as we can tell, no fullback on the roster, a lot of 12 personnel. Going to need some extra blocking. You might be carrying five tight ends on this roster on the 53 man. So a lot of opportunity there. I think the one thing you can lock down into the is the offensive line. We talked about it in the last couple of videos. It's Ruiz, it's McCoy, it's Clapp, it's Reduns, it's Banks, it's Young, it's Flog, it's Penning. You have your five starters, your three primary backups that kind of cover a lot of spots on the line. Saldivari stays healthy and gets back into the mix. He would likely be the ninth, and that might kind of be where you stop. But you still got Hergel, Simpkins, Kilty, Ball, and Azirum. And I think they all have some opportunity to try to work their way up and earn some playing time. But I don't know if that's in that 85% or if this is more back to practice squad area. if they clear waivers. We'll see how it turns out. But the numbers that I'm kind of coming up with for the offensive side is like 19 that I've redlined. I've said, yeah, I kind of feel good that if you're talking about an 85% number of our roster being set, and the majority of that is on the offensive line and the three quarterbacks. Yeah, basically 11 of the 19 right there. Everything else, especially in the area of depth, are asking young players to step up. Now, we'll talk about it a little later, but there's some free agent names that have been popping up that the Saints may be willing to sign if they can, and they could. They have the roster. They could get the roster space, and they have the money space to be able to do it. They could shake things up a little bit. And the same thing for the defensive side is basically very similar. But honestly, I am less confident on the defensive side than I am on the offensive side. Just looking at the edge rushers, Granderson and Young are fine. Cam Jordan, you would think you want him to as the veteran leader, and he's kind of the you know you really vocal guy and on that defensive side, along with Demario Davis and Honey Badger. And all three of those are guys you're like, yeah, we'd really like to keep them around one more year if they're able to play. The problem with Cam is I don't really know if we have a spot for him in this changing more to a 3-4 defense. I don't know if he's really an edge rusher. I don't know if he's even wanting to play in the interior like he did earlier in his career or a couple of times last few years where they kicked him inside to do some work. I don't think he was very fond of it. Don't know how much he's got left in the tank. So I'm not really sure how that's going to play out. Think of the rest of the edge rushers, or it's a situation where somebody on this is going to make the team. So is a guy like Foskey is his last chance? Will this scheme fit something he's capable of doing? And suddenly you go, okay, you're getting something out of the former second round pick. More than likely, they drafted Fadil Diggs. I think he and Foskey are almost battling from the same spot. Chris Rumpf and Jonah Williams are guys that have kind of experience in this, and both have crossed paths with Brandon Staley before. So they're very likely in the mix how this works out. But I think there's just a lot of uncertainty. I'll leave Cam Jordan with the three, but it's likely two. And then, of that 45 of the 53, that 85%, who else is really coming from this group? Defensive tackle is very similar. I think Broughton, Brzee, and Godshaw, obviously, I think those three they've got their spots as long as they don't screw it up and give them a reason not to keep them. But Ridgeway, Saunders, Boyd, Shepard, will the transition help him? I think Ridgeway, I mean, I really haven't heard anything about him at all. I sometimes forget he's even on the roster. And there's a possibility of bringing in more players there, veteran type players that kind of fit the scheme. Is that in the future also? Linebacker Davis Werner, and I think Stutzman was specifically drafted with the intent of getting snaps in this new 3-4 defense. Talking off the ball linebacker here because the outside linebackers are basically the edge rushers, but we know Stutzman can rush the passer. Besides being that tackle guy and athletic guy, I would not be in the realm of possibilities him or any of the backup linebackers backup, like Jackson or Staubert or Ford or Sewell or Powell, also getting into what I'm seeing is possibly in a very similar defense with Vic Fangio last year in Philly, Zach Bowen, where he was primarily a middle off the ball linebacker, but using him at times basically as an edge rusher or blitzing him up the middle also to get a pass rush. So I think some of these guys are going to be, if they can effectively show that, even though it may be situational, you may see that's how they're going to make this team. But of the top three, you have Demario, you have Pete, and now you have Danny, and I think that's the way it's going to go. I think the secondary is a little more like the offensive line, and that's for the line on the offensive side of being kind of more of a settled position. Sanker, Reed, Matthew, Taylor, Yidam, McKinstry, Riley, and JT Gray is a special teamer. I think that's really not probably going to be too much open. It's kind of how many you're going to keep overall in the defensive back, and the back end of that, guys that are on the roster that have been with Staley before, like Terrell Burgess, some of the holdovers, the young guys last year, Rejon Wright, Rico Payton. I think they've earned a right to kind of get into this mix and fight in training camp, try to be part of that group that they're going to rely on going in. Real quick, just going to talk about special teams. Zach Wood on the roster. I think he's the one you can just start off with and just go, yeah, he's making it. Long snapper. That's a high skill level. Saw that after in the NFL, and he does it very well. As far as I know, then nobody there even they're bringing in the tape do any other long snapping. But you got the kicker battle groupie in Smith, like we talked about. Burnip and Hayball on the punter side. We're only keeping one kicker and one punter on the active 53. Veteran guys probably have the edge in groupie and Hayball. I think they both played pretty well last year, but I do think this is going to be an open competition. The thing to kind of get back to where we are. Oh, by the way, that's 17 players roughly. I've got red on the defensive side. So with the three special teamers, whoever the kicker and the punter is going to be in Woods, it's 39. That's quite a few short. You're more on the 80% edge. What Lance Moore was talking about from that 80 to 85 to 90 leaves you on the existing roster right now about 48 players that are going to be fighting for the remaining spots, or at least the ability to turn some heads and maybe sign somewhere else if we do release them, or bring them back here on the practice squad. Ramchek has not officially, as of Monday morning, right now when I'm filming this, put in his retirement papers or processed, or however that works, like Carr has. As far as the Saints website, they're still showing him not they're on the active roster, not on the retired reserve list like Carr is. But those spots are going to be filled, and I think this is where you have the brief free agent conversation about who could be coming in, and they are likely, if they're coming in at this point, that's part of that number that Lance Moore's talking about. Players who, yeah, that's probably in that 85% range of who we're leaning on, thinking they're going to make this team, and they're going to be, unless they do something drastically that forces us to take them off that list. Any free agents you bring in right now, I think, are on that list. And there's interesting names. You got to remember Jonathan Bullard, long time 3-4 type guys, can play up and down that defensive line, veteran. He came in for a talk, and he shows up. Some of those veterans we were talking about from last year, can they make the 4-3 transition to 3-4? Well, they're going to have to. Sante Samuel Jr., if he clears medically in July, will be a sought after free agent, I think, by a lot of teams. But I truly believe we're one up, and that would probably make that defensive back room very interesting if he does show up in New Orleans. Two names added over the weekend: Nick Chubb, running back, and Gabe Davis, wide receiver. And I think both those guys, if we sign them, they're, no pun intended, but they're in that number. You know, I don't think you bring in either one of those guys unless you expect them to make the final 53 man, especially Chubb. He's coming off the devastating injury 2 years ago, recovered, played some last year. He looked good at times when he played against us in Cleveland. In fact, I was in the Cleveland game. I was very happy they quit giving him the ball, but that could have just been he was on a snap count or something like that, or had gotten a little banged up and they pulled him. I don't really know. Don't really remember. Just glad it happened. Gabe Davis was an emerging receiver in Buffalo with Josh Allen a few years ago. Jacksonville signed him to the big contract. Then had not really worked out there for him. But the good thing about that is, according to what I read um, yesterday when I saw this rumor pop up, apparently the offsets and all are on Jacksonville's side on that contract. So they released him. We sign him. We could do it at a veteran minimum for 1 year, which would be a steal, I think, because you low risk potential reward if you get the guy that can work in the offense and start being that second, third big play receiver that he was in Buffalo when he was there. And recently, this morning, Ian Rappaport's reporting that Green Bay is going to cut Jair Alexander, cornerback. I would think he would be the top corner probably in free agency once that happens, left, and could be a player in all this. And it's a guy that experienced in Green Bay, and and their version of the 3-4 that they've run over the last few years, that odd defense and playing corner and that. So kind of scheme familiar, and some of the stuff that goes with back there with the matchup zones and the zones and all. He shows up. That makes the defensive back room very, very, very interesting on many, many levels. So kind of wrap it all up and just put a bow on it. I'm glad I saw that, and that Lance Moore was talking about that, just this limited amount of reps that you have available in training camp, especially where now you're going to have the contact, and even that's limited compared to what it used to be in the NFL. The time and the resources just aren't there to have extensive battles. So I get his point of going, you know, and I don't know if he put pencil to pen the numbers or anything and coming up with that 80 to 90%, 85% numbers, but he was in the league for a long time on a couple of teams, definitely with the Saints. So I think he's got a good feel of how this works. And I think he's not that far off, looking at the majority of your roster decisions are going to kind of be made. And in that, some of your starter decisions are going to be made going into training camp. I think the point is here is, look, we can't have full blown, as much as I think fans and probably even the coaches would like to see. No, we want every job challenged in a full blown, competition for all 22 starting spots. Reality is, I don't think you could conceivably pull that off in training camp. Lack of a better phrase, I think you just kind of have to pick your battles on which ones are going to battle it out. Quarterback is huge for us, obviously, but I think they feel comfortable enough. The offensive line, that's more or less off the board, unless somebody in there either can pop from the back end and work his way up, or somebody who they're leaning on doesn't look like he can do the job, and then they have to start doing a shuffle on the depth chart, or a shuffle on who's going to play where. But I don't anticipate that. I don't anticipate a whole lot of that going on in the defensive backfield. But I think everything else, to some degree, you're going to have to find a couple guys to get to that 45 number, that basically that 85% that Lance Moore was talking about. Glad I caught that on that podcast. And it really, once you, or for me anyway, and anybody who's like me who gets kind of in the numbers going, where I can visualize more about the task that they have to perform in training camp to get this team competitive all over. With the culture change, let's just call it the responsibility and accountability, bringing that back, plus playing a better brand of football and an encouraging brand that, okay, yes, now we're bringing in the right players, the right personnel, the right coaching staff, and everything to get back to where we were. That run from like 2009 to 2011, or that 2017 to 2020 run. Get back into doing that, and not what we have been doing since 2020, which, it's going on 5 seasons now and I'm a spoiled Saints fan now from the earlier years. That's too long for me to go without seeing the progress we need to see to build back up, to be that constant perennial, win a division, make a challenge with a roster and a coaching staff that can make a challenge into the playoffs and go, hey, ultimate goal we want is to get back to the Super Bowl. I like the process, at least what we're hearing and seeing a little bit of. But I think, again, the real kicker is training camp, and how much of that 85% that they, or so, that they get right off the bat, where that's where we're using the build. So we'll be a competitive team. Try to get higher than that Vegas 5 over and under. I think it's 5 wins, and be competitive and be the team that we all want to see on the field building towards. I'm thinking like seeing teams like in 2007 and 2008, because, you know, that conversation in 2006 was a bit of a unicorn. We kind of jumped ahead thinking, oh, we've turned this around all in one year, but it really was a 2 or 3 year process. But you really saw it play out in 09, 010, and 011. Those teams were just monsters. First time here, you like what you saw, please go ahead, subscribe. Hit the like, the share, that all that wonderful stuff that helps feed the algorithm. And let me know in the comments, kind of, I what you think about the potential of the let's just use the Lance 4 85%, like 45 on the roster. Do we really have enough here to have a legitimately locked 45? Um, my numbers come up short, but what do you think? Is somebody I'm not giving enough credit to going, yeah, he's probably one of the guys they're going to lean on, but you know, it's real difficult to look at, and I think there's going to be. I really do think we're going grab some free agents, and you're going to see a roster shakeup. That the next time I do a way too early, probably going to get closer to the firm and number at some of the other positions. Going, oh yeah, yeah, that guy they brought in, he's one of the ones they're counting on. So, but till I see you next time, I'm Tim. Peace out and who dat.